Hello and welcome to the Swan Song Project Podcast. My name is Ben Buddy Slack. I'm the founder of the Swan Song Project and the host of this podcast. The Swan Song Project is a charity. We're based here in Leeds in England, and we help people who are facing the end of their lives or dealing with a bereavement to write and record an original song. We believe in celebrating lives, making memories and leaving legacies. If you want to find out more about the charity, you can visit our website, which is swansongproject.co.uk. The podcast features songwriters. Each episode I have a different songwriter on. I ask them to share with us one of their songs. We talk about how they wrote it. I ask them to share a songwriting tip, and I also ask them to share a song that's meaningful to them in some way relating to bereavement. This episode features Jonah Tolchin. Jonah's a fantastic songwriter and guitar player from America. He's just released his new album, Dockside. I've been a big fan of Jonah for a long time, and I've been really enjoying this new record, so I was really pleased he agreed to come on the podcast and talk about it. It's a really fascinating conversation, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you do, please like, share and subscribe to the podcast. We've got a lot more great guests coming up that I think you're really going to enjoy. But without further ado, here's Jonah Tolchin on the Swan Song Project Podcast. Okay, today I'm here with Jonah Tolchin. Thanks for joining me, Jonah.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're looking forward to talking to you. So this is the Swan Song Project Podcast. For anybody new to the podcast, we do it in three sections. First, we're going to have one of Jonah's songs. We're going to have a bit of a chat about how he wrote that. In section 2, I'll ask Jonah for a songwriting tip. And then in section 3, we're going to talk about a song that's meaningful to Jonah in some way relating to bereavement. So over to you, Jonah. Which song of yours have you chosen to talk to us about today?
I have chosen the song Suffering Well, which is off of my newest release, Dockside.
Fantastic. So let's have a listen to it now. This is Suffering Well.
I can live on the tightrope. I can walk on high cold. I can perform miracles. All because I know I'm suffering well. I'm suffering well. I can move mountains. I don't need holy fountains. I know I'm surrounded. So many blessings I can't count them, 'cause I'm suffering well. Oh, I'm suffering well. Is full of sorrow, and if you're gonna make it through tomorrow, then you gotta figure out, yes, you gotta figure out about suffering well. Suffering well. Oh, suffering well. Oh, suffering. 'cause I'm suffering well. Yes, I'm suffering well.
Okay, brilliant. So that was Suffering Well by Jonah Tolchin. First of all, some killer guitar playing in there, Jonah.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I love the solos and just the like the whole groove and feel of it's great. And you've got Luther Dickinson playing guitar on that one with you as well, have you?
Yeah, I do. Luther from North Mississippi All Stars, he took the first guitar solo, and then I took the second one.
Nice. Yeah, Luther's amazing player as well, isn't he? Yeah, brilliant. So what can you tell us about writing that song?
Yeah, so that song was in a way the thesis for that entire record. And what I mean by that is I think about blues music and Buddhism as being very related. And I've been thinking about making a blues record for a long time. And I've recorded a lot of records. Some of them have some blues tunes on them, but never a record that was like this much in that universe. And so I have done a lot of studying and reading and retreats and stuff like that with not with Thich Nhat Hanh, but with his organization. And he talks a lot about this idea of suffering well and how in life, like we all experience suffering of some sort, and that's just inevitable. There's no way around it. And so one of our jobs as humans is to learn how to suffer well, how to do it in such a way that we're going to maybe come through those flames a little bit easier, or with being able to use some of these tools to pass through those flames. And he even goes so far as to say, and I don't think this is applicable to everything, but how the suffering can actually make us grow. And another thing that I really like that he talks about is No Mud, No Lotus, which is a book that he wrote. And I believe that Suffering Well may even, I don't remember where I heard him talk about it. It may have been that book, I'm not sure. But the idea is basically that lotus flowers grow from the mud. And so without the mud, i.e. suffering, there would be no lotus flower. And so that's where the idea of suffering well came from. And I put it into kind of like this blues rock format, and tried to kind of channel a lot of that energy of both kind of the sorrow and the painfulness with kind of this uprising and joyfulness at the same time. So that's kind of what that song became, and how and it's really the foundation for the whole project in a way.
Yeah, it's really really good way of describing it, isn't it? And yeah, it feels very true. It reminds me of a phrase that I heard, I think it was in Andrew Solomon talking about depression. And I'm sure he said something something along the lines of, if you banish the dragons, you banish the heroes too. Which I thought was a really nice way of, kind of capturing that, like, yeah, I guess strength through adversity, the message. So was that the first song that you wrote for the album based on, was it the kind of that philosophy was what you were trying to capture, and you started with this one and then the rest followed suit? Or?
Well, to be honest, I don't entirely remember, but I will say that that was the first one of the first phrases that guided the project, because I remember thinking, if I wrote a blues record, what would I call it? And it was that was like the working title for the album. And to be honest, I sort of almost wish that I did name it that. But I'm a little bit weird with title tracks, which is a whole other conversation. But so yeah, I would say if it wasn't the first song I wrote, it was certainly one of the first ideas that brought everything else forward.
And is that a way how you'd often write, of having like a kind of concept that you want to convey and working from there?
It really depends. It really depends. I'm a little bit you know, I don't really have a particular way that I go about it. I will say that the one thing that I try to do is to not write a song if I'm not feeling inspired. Um, because there's a lot of times where I'll want to write a song, but there's actually nothing there. It's just like um, my ego or whatever is like trying to create. And I think there's positive things about that impulse to create, even if there's nothing that's really there. And sometimes you can discover things. And actually, one of the best examples or metaphors for this that I heard was from Dave Chappelle talking about on this show called Comedians with Cars, talking about how when he has a joke that he writes, he was describing it as um, that the joke is driving the car, and he's like in the trunk of the car. He's like he's not even involved, but sometimes he wants to write something, and then he's driving the car, but there's nothing there, and it's never a good joke when that happens. Is what he was saying. So that's kind of my long-winded way of saying that I really try to only write when there's really something there. And so as a result of that, I actually don't even write that much, except when I have an album that I know that I'm going to record. Then all of a sudden I get very inspired.
So you work well to a deadline, I guess. So is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And would you have had like, so was the process of this, you decided you wanted to do a blues record, you had that kind of concept, and then you kind of set yourself that goal, and then the songs just emerged from there?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, when I linked up with Luther, because that happened like I don't know, 2 months before we went into the studio. Um, that gave me a lot of creative energy as well, thinking, okay, here's this great musician that I admire, who, um, you know, I'm going to be able to share these songs with, so they better be good songs. I can't, phone it in, and it also just gave me more energy for writing.
Yeah. And did you have so you say wanting to have a blues album particularly? So I mean, blues is one of my favorite genres as well. It was a lot of what I played when I was younger. Did you have? How did you feel about I guess restrictions and freedom within genre? If you kind of set that you're gonna, you've got an idea of what you want to write, did you feel yeah, I guess like what was your thoughts around making a blues album, and any particular boundaries you felt around that, if there were any?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, blues is a tricky genre for a variety of reasons. Number one, I'm a white guy, so we'll get that out of the way. Blues is absolutely black music, and so you have to kind of come into it with that respect and that knowledge and appreciation. Um, and then the other thing is a lot of blues is very, to me, very derivative feeling. It's not there's like kind of these tropes that you can come across. And so and some of them to me as a writer are attractive, and they don't feel quote unquote cliche, and some of them feel like they could be cringe, if you don't go about it in the right way. So it's a little bit of a minefield, and it's one of the reasons why I had not written a record like this until now. Because I was just it's actually it's really hard to write a good, what I consider to be a good blues song. Um, and I think in terms of genre boundaries, like this record, it has a few songs that are definitely like straight ahead blues. Like Endless Highway is probably the best example of that. But then it has quite a bit it's blues influenced, but it's not really like if you played it for someone, they might not say, oh yeah, that's blues.
Mhm.
And actually Suffering Well is a good example. It's not really, if you play it for like a blues traditionalist person, they're not going to listen to it, be like, this is a blues song. But my philosophy has always been that the spirit of blues is kind of like an energy that can be put into any kind of music, because it's, to me, what the blues is about transmuting usually suppressed or depressive energy into something else. So it's No Mud, No Lotus is the perfect metaphor for that.
Mhm.
And so I've tried to do that on every record, at least here and there, as much as I can. Um, but I would say that's what unifies the body of work, and not all of it is necessarily like blues. If that makes
Ye-
sense.
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I completely agree about how hard it is to write a good modern blues song. And I think there's so much. I don't know whether it's because like the big figures of blues are such kind of characters and such kind of like have such a kind of authority over it that it is kind of like it's hard for someone to do something, and I guess there is so much imitation in blues, isn't there, where like so like yeah, a young man now writing a song to try and sound like Muddy Waters or something like that, it just doesn't work, does it? Like it's very hard to um do that authentically. And it's something what I think you've really nailed on this is that I think um and yeah, I agree completely. There's blues music is in like 12 bar shuffle kind of
Yeah, yeah,
standard blues formula, or there's like music which, like say, some of these ones where it's bluesy, but it's not straightforward blues. Um, but lots of your lyrics as well, like they feel very authentic to you, rather than you know like a blues song from the 50s or something like that. It sounds like the lyrics feel quite modern, and there's a lot of like there's vulnerability, I guess, in it as well, isn't there? And lots of I guess songs that kind of cover modern life in a way which isn't a traditional blues trope, I guess, in a way. That
mm,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Um and yeah, so I guess was that the aim? Did you have an aim lyrically what you wanted to do with your, or in general that you want to do with your songs, or do you just see what comes out when you start writing?
Hmm. I think it's kind of both, and like the Suffering Well thing was always a part of it, behind probably every song to a degree. But I would say a lot of it happens spontaneously, in the moment, and usually it has to do with the feeling. I write better from feelings than I do from ideas. Like, you know, like a concept of, so I mean, it depends. I can write really really well if the concept comes to me, but that's the problem, is that the concept usually does not come to me. Um, so I have to rely on the feelings, and then the feeling will usually birth the concept. Um, but it really depends. I think for this record, a lot of it, and I guess we're kind of getting into writing territory a little bit, because this may have been one of the things that I mentioned with writing ideas, but I'm very inspired by the music, um, and specifically the guitar, because I'm a guitar player first. That's what I fall in love with. That's why I play music. Um, and so if I'm writing on the guitar, I will I would say 90% of the time it will start there, and I'll just kind of be coming up with a riff or a chord progression or something, or maybe even a sound. Like maybe it's even a pedal that I really like that I'm trying out, or I have this like 70s champ sitting over here. So maybe I'll just crank that up and start to get inspired from just the sound. Um so yeah, that's where that's how I start to connect with the feelings and see what's there. It's almost like archaeology in a way.
Mhm.
You know, you're sort of uncovering things that may already be there that you didn't realize they were there because our modern life is so busy and we don't really have time um, to like go within and try to see what's there. And frankly, I think that I suppress a lot of my um, feelings and everything like that most of the time, so that when I write, maybe there's like an abundant mine of things there, and maybe that's intentional. I don't really know.
Yeah, saving it up for when you sit down to write.
Yeah.
um, so is that process then? Do you sit down and just pick up the guitar and start playing with no kind of nothing in mind of like, oh, I'm gonna play something bluesy today. I'm gonna play something like this. I'm gonna work on this kind of style of playing. You just start playing and see what comes out, and then you judge what feeling the music has created in you, or is it you sit down with a feeling and think, I'm gonna play something to try and it might be somewhere in the middle. So I feel like a bit of a weird question.
No, it's both of those. I mean, like I don't really have one method, but if I did, that would be the one method. Would Just to clarify, the one method would be picking up the guitar and basically screwing around until a song is born. And it will start with the chords or some kind of riff. But there's also times where I will have a feeling and I know why that feeling is there. So for example, I know that the feeling is there because I got into an argument with somebody and you know I'm just kind of trying to, this is an arbitrary example. Um and something happened and now there's like a conflict in the relationship, and maybe a song will be born from that, or from a loved one struggling with some kind of issue, or something that I read that I've read. Like, I remember with this record, I picked up, I think it was like one of Alan Lomax's books about the blues, um and was kind of reading to get the spirit of that type of music and the landscapes that he was writing about into my writing. And I remember reading a line, um and it was something about like Robert Johnson's mother, like when she found out that he died, and like it was like her lament, or like something about her suffering. And that, I remember that being very inspiring to me, and actually writing a song for this record that was from her perspective. It didn't make the record, but that's just another example of how something could come to pass.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then so it's often music first and then lyrics second. And um, how many, like, is it often a continuous process per song, or do things split? So when you get one, is it like, right, I see this one through to the finish now, and that one's done, I'm on to the next one, or is it like, I've got this bit of song here with a few lyrical ideas, but I've got this other riff coming together here and some other ideas for this? So.
Yeah, I think I'm I might be changing this, but what I've done for my whole life up until now is I have to finish the song in one sitting.
Oh wow.
And I'm starting to not do that as much, maybe because now I'm a dad and I just don't have time. Um, that could be why. But my philosophy has always been kind of twofold. One, if I don't finish the song, then I'm probably not going to finish it later. And two, if I don't finish the song, if I do come back to it later, I may not have the same feeling that I
Mm,
have now. And so there's like an urgency to it. Um, and I actually said something in a interview like maybe 10 years ago or something, or maybe not that long. There was like, my process of songwriting is like capturing fireflies in jars, like, and there it's just very fleeting. Like,
mm,
going to be there and then they're gone. And so there's an urgency to it. And I do still feel that. And maybe it's my way of tricking myself into, you know, getting motivated to like sit down and focus. Or maybe it's really true. I don't really know. But I often will encourage other writers, like friends of mine who maybe are just starting out with writing, to do that, to like really like don't walk away until you at least finish the first draft. Doesn't mean the song is done, but like write like, is it going to be verse 1, chorus, verse 2, chorus, the end, or is there a bridge in there or whatever, like whatever the structure is to finish it. And you could even have placeholder lyrics. But that I think gives you something to sit with, because if you come back to it, then it's like more, it takes like, at least for me, so much effort to be like, okay, here's this unfinished song, like what am I going to do with it now? Because I don't even remember like why I wrote it anymore, so there's like no motivation. And that could also have to do with like my ADHD, or like lack of memory at times. So
yeah. Yeah, I think it's yeah, it's a really good way to do it. It's something I've done some songs like that, but I definitely kind of know what you mean about sometimes when that flow is just going and like it is just worth, you know, following it until you've got something completed. So we say in like some of the songwriting sessions at Swan Song, we normally kind of aim for an hour, but I always kind of try and keep loose time at the end. So if the ball's rolling, you don't want to be just like, right, sorry, clock's up now. You want to make sure you can get what you can out. Yeah, there's, and I guess that feels like, you know, like you said about kind of bottling up, having lots of things, I guess, in you, that when that happens, then it's like you've got plenty of ideas to. So that's something that I was really impressed with. Like a lot of the lyrics on songs are really interesting, and there's a lot of kind of ideas in there. So yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it came out that quickly.
yeah, I think it's about flow state, you know, like you were kind of just referring to. That oftentimes has to be there, because I just don't have the patience to write a song when that's not there. And so I often don't even try, because I don't want to feel like what I'm creating is like work for me. Because that's not why I do it. You know, there's a lot of things in my life that I do that feel very much like work, and I do it anyway because it just has to be done. But a song, you know, a song is different. Writing songs is different. I feel like there's something, I have more reverence for that process and for the joy of that process. And I don't want to kind of, I don't know why I'm thinking of this word, but like insult the process of, and turn it into something that I don't want it to become. Um, but you know, some of the greatest songwriters, I think, have a very different philosophy than me about that. Like I remember someone telling me once that Leonard Cohen would take it like a year to write a song or more.
Many years, I think, for some of them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like, man, what did that look like? What was that all about? And I'm, you know, I'm curious about that. I think that requires like a massive amount of diligence um and everything else like that. I think I don't know, maybe I'm just like impatient. And it's like I guess I am. Like I always do want to get things done. You know, it's
Mm.
like here's this thing in front of me, like I want to finish it and then move on to the next thing. But maybe I would write better songs if I trained myself to not do that. But I don't know, that's just been the way that it works for me. But I will say that I do have some songs that I've written that I like wrote and I was like, okay, that's not going to fit this album, then I'll pick it up again, like it'll just stay in my mind, and I'll find it on voice memo, and that'll happen for like years, and then I will rewrite the song, for
Mm.
years, theoretic, like technically, and then finish it, just because it doesn't go away. And I guess that's like the mark of a good song, and maybe that's why someone like Leonard Cohen would wait, because he didn't trust his first impulse of like,
Mm.
okay, I like this now, but will I like it in 5 years? That's a whole other question. And if you do, then it probably means it's a good song. So that's maybe another way to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, how like like I mean, there's so many different approaches that can all produce great songs. And whenever I hear stories like that of whether when I first heard those things, particularly like Leonard Cohen's a big hero of mine, and like how long he spent on songs, but I kind of imagine it that he's there like 8 hours a day working on the one song for 10 years,
Yeah,
whereas obviously it's probably a bit more like you described there, where he has like lots of songs that are kind of in his catalog, and he sits and works. And like, so some days you might spend a bit of time on this one, and it just gradually gets chipped and chipped away. I think it was Anthem. He said took him about 10 years, but he would also like write like 60 verses per song and then cut it down to 4 or something like that. So
yeah.
whether like he might have actually written the verses that ended in the final cut in a day, but then he spent 10 years writing other verses that he threw away in the end.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
mean, maybe there's something about like like a maturing process, like aging,
like a whiskey or something.
whiskey, or yeah, exactly. You have to like kind of let it naturally develop just by sitting there. And I've actually heard similar things about like screenwriters, because I got interested in screenwriting um a few years ago, and was like researching stuff. And this one guy, I don't remember who it was talking about how like he'll write a script and then he'll put it in a drawer for like a year or something and just not look at it, and then rewrite it from memory or something like that, and then like look at it again and compare them or something.
Yeah, that's an interesting technique.
Yeah.
um, yeah, and I agree with what you said as well about like kind of trusting when something sticks in your head that it's probably worth revisiting.
Yeah.
That's what me and my band used to do. We used to just every week we practice and we'd just jam for like the first half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that, and like without really thinking there were going to be any songs, and then like we wouldn't record anything either. And then if the next week we came back and like, oh, this is that riff we played last week, or this is that thing, then it's like that's probably a reason. I mean, a lot of the time we just completely forgot what they were. Kind of trusting if the music was right for something, it'd stick with you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you with that process? One of the things that I'm really interested in is how people know when a song's finished. Like and particularly when you've got something like Suffering Well, where you have obviously have an understanding of the concept that you want to convey in it. Do you have a clear like feeling or sense when you've captured that, particularly with one like that, where you have a something in mind that you want the song to convey?
That's a really good question. I mean, for me, it's kind of turned into like an instinct thing, um, where it's a little bit hard to put into words, but I think one of the things that you're touching upon may have to do with, or at least it reminds me of, how sometimes writers will struggle with knowing when something is finished. And it's like, could this be better? Could this be better? Could this be better? And like there's an instinct there, and as a result, sometimes nothing ever gets finished and nothing ever gets released. And so I'm like the opposite of that, because I um I have some people in my life, um you know without kind of naming who they are, who do that are very close to me, that I watched growing up doing that, and I was frustrated by it, because I was like, why can't this be finished? Like, because I was supporting it and encouraging and everything like that. And so I decided kind of that I was like, okay, I don't want to do that, because I've watched some other people that I care a lot about essentially suffer because of it.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that I at times can even be a little bit reckless about it and go the other way, because I'm like, no, like I just want to get stuff out there and just finish things. And it does feel good. That's the other thing, because once you start doing it, then and letting things go, it feels really good to, at least in my experience, to move on and to then go on to the next thing and create something else. But I get the struggle, because it is a struggle for a lot of people. Um, and I don't want to give bad advice like be reckless and write a crappy song and just put it out there. But at the same time, I do think that that is what I would encourage people to do more so than the opposite,
Mm.
because it's the best way to learn. As soon as you put something out there, that's when you know if it was finished or not. You know,
Yeah.
because you can go and you can say, I don't know if this is finished. I don't know if it's finished. But when you put it out, then all of a sudden you get the perspective, because you start thinking about it like the way that, like, oh, what is this person, like even specific people, like, oh, what is like, John gonna think about this song? And you almost listen to it from that person's mind, which is a really weird experience. But I think I've heard other people talk about that. And then you can kind of learn some stuff. And if you're lucky, sometimes people even will tell you, and sometimes it's not what you want to hear, but I think that it's good to be open to that, because as artists we're so sensitive, because we're like laying it all of our vulnerability on the table. And so it's hard to be like, if someone's like, that song sucked, it's hard. And like, obviously that's not constructive criticism. That's just someone being whatever.
Yeah.
But it is helpful at times for, even to ask somebody. And that's another thing, like sharing songs with people, that could be another thing that provides like that reassurance about it, whether or not something's done. And I will do that occasionally, where I won't know, and I'll send it, or I'll play it for my wife, actually. That's like the most common thing. And I'll watch her reaction, and she's very honest with me. She'll be like, there's been a couple times where she's like, I hate that song. It's really bad. And it was really bad. Um, but most of the time she will give me something back, or I can just watch her reaction and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice in there. And I think it's like there's I guess the songs that are capturing a moment in time and a feeling, and if you overthink it, you lose that that feeling and that energy of what it is, and you can kind of, there's a way I've heard someone describe it recently, of like you start polishing an edge, and then you just keep polishing it until it's completely changed what it was, because you've tried to refine it too much. And music's one of those things, isn't it, where like, and blues is obviously a great example of songs that are very raw and very kind of rough and rough around the edges, but convey so much feeling and are so impactful. But that it's not a thing where the more you polish it, the better it's going to become.
Yeah.
Music, there are songs where it was just a complete spur of the moment thing, record it, and it's better than something which has been worked on for however long. And especially if you're working on something by yourself, like the idea of just being in your own head with something for so long, you can just completely lose any perspective of what it's going to sound like to someone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fascinating process.
You brought up a great thing that I've actually never thought about, which is like, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to that music, is that it's a complete process in the act of make, like I'll give you an example, like when we're in the studio and we're recording one of these songs live, it doesn't need anything else. It's just a complete thing. Like, for example, the song "Nothing Gonna Take My Blues Away" on that record that I just put out, that was the first take of the first song that we recorded all together. The first time we played all together. The drummer never heard the song before. And there's no overdubs. it's just, that was it. And so it was like a moment. And with like a lot of other genres, that's not how it works. You can't just go in and play a song live and that's what ends up on the record. Like, no way. Like, you're gonna probably comp vocals for days, and figure out like all of these other layers that you want to add, maybe even tune the vocals, like, so, and like on and on forever. And that's one of the reasons I think I really like this making this type of music, that can just be made like in a moment, and then that's it, and just recorded, and there's nothing else that needs to happen.
Yeah. Did I read that you recorded the whole album in a weekend, on 2 days?
I think so. I think we booked maybe three. I can't remember if we booked 3 or 4 days. But I remember that we didn't use the last day, whichever it was. And it was at most 3 days of recording. And the first day may have been like, we got there like late afternoon, set everything up and recorded like that song. And maybe, I don't think there was anything else we did that night. So yeah, it was a pretty quick process. And I tend to do that with most of my projects that I've made. They will, like, the album Thousand Mile Night, we made, I think it was in 3 or 4 days as well, but that also included mixing for the whole thing, like on site. So I like to work fast for my stuff, although sometimes it is nice to slow down a little bit and like enjoy the process and like let it stretch out a little more.
Yeah, for any listeners who might not, really with kind of how recording works for bands and stuff. So the way Jonah's done this is recording live, so all the musicians are just playing live at the same time. Everything's being recorded, and that's how you do it. Whereas a lot of music is recorded bit by bit, isn't it? So like you might start with the drums and get the drum track down, then add some bass on top of that. So the people are actually playing together, but everyone's recording off into a click and things like that. So they make sure the timing's all done. And yeah, I've always been a big fan of live recording as well. I've tried to capture that live energy of musicians playing together. But yeah, it's very impressive to get that many songs. So particularly, like, I was going to ask you about that. I assumed like the band would be very well rehearsed beforehand, and you put your time practicing and making sure everyone knew the parts and everything. But to just go in and not even have played them before and still get them done is very impressive.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's actually my preferred method as a producer. So like I co-produced this record with Luther, but I produce, I don't know, like usually like one record a year for somebody else. And the way that I go about that process is I don't like for anyone to hear the songs before we go in, with maybe the exception of the bass player. And it's because I really like the raw experience of people figuring it out on the spot and using their first instincts, because oftentimes those first instincts are the best. And if you let someone sit with songs for too long, it's going to sound very polished. They're going to have an idea. They may not play well with the other musicians because they've figured out their part, and their part is of course right, because they've been practicing it for weeks or whatever, and then to adjust then becomes difficult. So I just really prefer that. And I actually I was recording, it may have been the session for Count on Me, we were talking about that tune that I recorded, and the guitar player, one of the guitar players is named Fred Tackett from the band Little Feat, and he played on one of Bob Dylan's records. I think it was Slow Train Comin' maybe. And we're talking about how that process was going and when. And I think it was recorded in Muscle Shoals. And he said that they didn't rehearse any of the songs, but they did rehearse. So I thought that was interesting. They rehearsed completely different songs than the songs that they were actually going to be recording. And it was strictly so that they could kind of get to gel as a band. But yeah, for me, I just love just going in and the thrill of like seeing what happens.
Yeah, that is a really interesting way of doing it, of playing. And I can see the the idea in it of like you kind of get a feel of how someone plays, even if you don't know what they're going to play, but you know what kind of feel they're going to bring to it. So then when you do have that particular song, you might have an interesting way of fascinating. Brilliant. So let's move into section 2 now, shall we? This is where I ask my guest for a songwriting tip. And what usually happens on this podcast, what I think we definitely had today, is we've had loads of great tips in the first section. But what particular tip would you like to share with us today, Jonah?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the biggest tip that I have with songwriting, and this can carry over to other areas of life, is really just like being kind and patient with oneself. Um, I think that people are oftentimes too hard on themselves. And when it comes to creating, like it requires a lot of vulnerability with oneself. I mean, forget about sharing it with the world. Just the process of writing something can be a really vulnerable, challenging process for somebody to do, especially if the song is like real, if it's a song about something real instead of like a lot of the pop songs that we have these days, which who knows what people are even talking about on in a lot of them. So if you're writing a song with feeling, I think it it requires like just this patience and kindness to oneself. Um, and so I think that that would be my biggest um my biggest tip for the day. Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. And would you mean in terms of like if somebody who sat down to write something, like not judging themselves too harshly and
Yeah,
things like that?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it could look like a lot of different things. I think that um like when we're kids, if we're lucky, we have we're given like this freedom of expression. Um and so whatever we make, whatever we draw or color or write, like we're not at a certain point of being kids. Like my daughter is 8 years old, so she's very much applies to her age right now. And I'll say that I remember like when I was 8, I didn't feel the way that I think she feels, where I felt like not as free as she does for various reasons. But if you're lucky, that's why I say if you're lucky, um, you have that freedom. And I think that creativity should, in my opinion, it should be able to feel safe and open, and you should be able to write whatever you want without fear of anything
Mm,
at all. Because that can really get in the way of the process. And the other thing to remember is like you don't have to do anything with the song. Like if you don't like what you wrote, you can throw it out. Um, you could literally burn it if you wanted to. Like you could do whatever you want. So I think that it's just good to like challenge yourself as a writer to like have no fear and to be and I think that requires like being kind to oneself. And this is especially relevant for me at today because I have a friend who I've been speaking with about that particular thing. He has a hard time. He has a lot of negative self-talk, which many of us do. And especially when it comes to the creative process, that's not a good thing. But it's not good in general. I mean, I hate to say good or bad. It just it's a challenging thing that ultimately crumbles mental health. Um, and you know that's something that I feel like requires a little bit of attention for songwriters and musicians, and there's people that are giving that attention more now. I see it. I don't remember hearing about it like even 5 years ago as much. But yeah. So I really think it's about that. Like that's like a foundational element to being able to write and be creative.
Yeah, I think yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny, isn't it, that like, you know, writing and creativity and things like are so kind of, you know, known to be so good for people's mental health, but so much of the time, and I think it's the purity of the process which is really good for people, but people get lost in all the. It's very easy to get lost in all the surrounding parts of it, and I think, as you said there, about the ability to write for writing's sake. So I like to write something, and if you don't like it, you can just throw it away. Like, rather than being like, oh, whatever I write now, somebody's going to assess and somebody's going to look at and judge. I feel that's a very liberating thing. I remember hearing that, like, I don't remember in a book or something a while ago, but the idea of sitting down with the plan of like, I'm going to write a page of something, and then I'm going to just throw it away. So nobody's, like knowing going in, this can be anything goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's surprisingly hard, isn't it, to be even when you set yourself up in those kind of scenarios where like you're completely alone, you've got your piece of paper or whatever you're going to do, and like knowing that you have that complete control of it, it still is very hard to kind of, you know, let yourself express fully.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It can be terrifying. I mean, it is for me, like, especially if you're feeling a lot, because the thing is, like, I think that we're all guilty, and this is not a bad thing, of distracting ourselves from the way that we feel. And it makes sense. I mean, like, with what's going on in the world and what's going on, like, on a microcosm and a macrocosm, both in anyone's given life, it's too much. Like, we can't feel it all. We would just like bust. So it's good. Distracting ourselves is good, but of course, like, and I don't mean to get like into the weeds with it, but like, you know, a lot of commerce in industries built upon creating things to distract us, and that's predicated on the fact that we need to be distracted in the first place. So I think that it can get into an extreme, and it isn't. I think that we're absolutely in an extreme right now, probably the most that we've ever been. And at the same time, the reverse side is that we're also talking about mental health probably more than we've ever talked about it. But there's more things to distract ourselves with than ever. So it's an interesting thing. But my point is that when we're writing songs, we may have been living in this state of being distracted for weeks or months or years before we sit down to write the song, and then it's all of a sudden like, oh, now I'm feeling something. That's kind of overwhelming. That can be terrifying to do that. That's why I say, like, being kind to oneself, and that could actually involve taking a break, you know, like not trying to finish a song in one sitting, for instance, like being like, this is too heavy right now, like I need to take a break and go outside, you know, instead of like banging my head against the wall and, you know, being like having like the tortured artist archetype about it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of complexity to it, but at the same time, it's very simple in the fact that if we're being kind to ourselves and we're aware of what we need in order to do that, then that's it. That's just the rule, and then you follow that, and that has its own current and its own way that will move. So yeah, I think if staying true to that can really provide a lot of security, and also hopefully like a lot of results, like creatively for people.
Yeah, and I feel like it would apply to what we touched on earlier of, like, I guess, discovering what works for you. You know, like we kind of talked about how sometimes you can write a song in one sitting, and that's great. Sometimes you'll spend a long time on it, and I guess having that kindness to yourself about not being like, oh, well, so-and-so wrote a song in one sitting and it was great. So-and-so wrote a song and I need to spend months and months on this. I need to write extra verses, or, just being like, this is the way I'm doing it today. This is what feels good.
Totally. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Just touching back to the album for a second. You mentioned there was a song which didn't make the cut of the album. How many songs do you write compared to how many you release, and how much do you, I guess, like between projects, do you play regularly just for the sake of playing, and just like, do you just play just to enjoy playing guitar, or are you always writing and leaving things by the way and moving things forward?
Yeah, so for this particular record, I want to say I had somewhere around maybe 15 to 18 songs that I had written. And of those, we recorded maybe 13 or 14. There was definitely one that maybe I think there was only one that we recorded that didn't make the record, because I realized actually that like the sentiment was like too aggressive and it just felt like bad, it just didn't feel good. And actually that was one of those songs that was rattling around my brain for years, and maybe it's just still not finished, but it kind of depends. I'll always overwrite, and I'll always, when I'm producing a record, make sure that the artist overwrites, meaning writes more songs than are required to actually satisfy the completion of the record, because inevitably one or two will not work in the studio. It doesn't mean that that those aren't good songs necessarily. It can mean that, or it can mean that they're not finished songs. But it could also be that, like, I just had this happen with a record where one of the songs, it's a good song, but like we just didn't get a good recording of it. And so I think it's important to have that. I forget the second part of the question though. What was the second part?
It was about how often you write and how often you just play. So if you're not working on it, if you're not like planning an album, how often are you playing, and do you play just for the fun of playing, or do you sit down to play and end up writing stuff?
Yeah, that also depends. Like right now, I've been in a period of time where I have like some family stuff going on, with my dad in particular, and I've had to take care of him really since June and do a lot of work with that. So like that is making me not feel as creative and not as inspired. And so I'm not playing as much right now. But I've already made an agreement with myself, and this goes back to high school, or maybe shortly after, where I feel like it's actually good to take breaks from playing. So I don't feel bad about it. And it actually makes me want to play more when I actually do feel the energy to play. And it's the same with writing. Like I really some people will be like, I write from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. every day. That sounds great. I would love to do that. I just it doesn't work for me. Um I can only, it's like goes back to like the Dave Chappelle thing. Like if there's not an idea driving the car, I know from experience that like it's probably not going to work. So I wait for the ideas to come to me, and sometimes I won't write a song for months. Um, like I haven't written a song. Well, I think it's been like a month since I wrote the last song that I've written. But that's also partly because when I have a record coming out, I don't usually write, because I'm so focused on that, and I know that it's probably going to be a while before the next thing comes out anyway. And historically, I will be dissatisfied with songs that I write if I sit on them for too long, which is maybe that's kind of a problem, because it goes back to the Leonard Cohen thing of like, well, if you maybe you should sit on them, because then you'll know if it's a bad song. But anyway, that's kind of like my circuitous answer to that question.
Hello, I am Richard Gibson, and I wrote a song with the Swan Song Project for my son Leo, who died in 2021, aged 17. Leo loved to listen to and play music, so this felt like the perfect way to acknowledge our loss. Writing and performing the song has helped me express just some of the things that made Leo such a special person to so many people. It also taught me some wonderful creative skills I can use to help me with my grief. Now the song is finished, it is out there for anybody to listen to, keeping Leo's memory alive for as long as there are people to sing and hear his song. Please donate to the Swan Song Project to help more people like me write a swan song. Thank you.
So grateful for the time that we spent together. Our hearts filled with your love to carry forever.
So let's move into section 3 now, shall we? This is where I ask my guests to share with us a song that's meaningful to them in some way relating to bereavement. And what I'll do here is I'll put the link to the song in the description of the episode. So if you're not familiar with the song, you can go and have a listen to it and come back to hear what we have to say about it. So which song did you choose for us for this section, Jonah?
So I picked the song Most of the Time by Bob Dylan off of his album Oh Mercy. And a while back I made a top 10 playlist of like my top 10 songs of all time. And this is like my number one song.
Oh, wow.
And I just love it. And it's one of those things where I'm almost hesitant to break it down.
Yeah.
I don't want to, destroy the magic of it. But yeah, it's I love this song so much.
It's an amazing song. Dylan's just got such a magic way of capturing things, hasn't he? And songs that are almost seem quite simple on the surface, but are so rich and so deep in so many ways.
Oh man, yeah. I was looking at the lyrics of this, and before we got on, and I was like, this is like a college class could be that could be taught on this song. There's just so much going on in it.
Yeah, and so that the title lyric, the most of the time, and that the lots of it's kind of about feeling okay most of the time, I guess, and it feels so relevant when I was thinking about it for this section of the podcast, particularly feeling about bereavement, and that feels so apt for well, I mean, I think the song's kind of mainly about like the loss of a relationship, isn't it? It kind of seems to be what it's alluding to, but that feeling where most of the time you might be fine, and I find it a lot of people ask me about Swan Song and ask how you manage the grief of it, and I don't really feel like I've got a simple answer, because it is like most of the time these things are okay, but some of the time they're not. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of refreshing, right? Like the fact that there's an acknowledgement of that. So I think socially, of course, you can say like, "Oh, I'm not doing well right now," but generally speaking, when you say "How are you?" to somebody, you're not really expecting them to say anything other than "Oh, doing all right" or whatever, And so this song is kind of like an acknowledgement of like, yeah, I'm doing fine most of the time, but it also gets into like more of like the grit and feeling of like, well, what about that other little bit of the time? And there's like this acknowledgement of that's just so powerful to me.
Yeah, he's just a master of those kind of it reminds me a little bit of Not Dark Yet. The one off Time Out of Mind. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. Where it's kind of like it's like on that line, isn't it? It's not a definitive. This is how something is. It's like it's that grey area which is very complex.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, like how this song, it's about a relationship, probably. That's what it feels like. But it's also um it makes you just feel a how do you put it? Life in general. You know, it's not just about
Mm.
relationships, it's about your entire daily waking life. Um and anyone could relate to it, even if they're in a perfectly fine relationship. Um because it's about it, but it's not. It's like very paradoxical in that way.
Yeah, so I think Dylan just seems to be a master of like songs that can be interpreted in a million different ways and have
Yes.
that like amazing specificity, but also amazing universality to them. He's a wizard, isn't he?
Oh man, yeah, that song, yeah, and it's especially the version. Yeah, okay. The other thing I want to say is like a lot of the time a song will hit me not because of the lyrics, but because of the music.
Mm,
And like with my record, I feel proud of that. Like I feel like I can say more with my guitar much of the time, most of the time, than I can lyrically. And with this particular recording, the way that I'll say the bass on it, there's a little bass line, and you'll know it when you listen to the song exactly what I'm talking about. It's so powerful to me, and like it speaks volumes just in this one line on the bass that it just I feel so emotionally connected to it. Like I feel like I have like a personal relationship with that particular bass line. And
mm,
whenever I hear it, it brings me like so much. And I don't even want to say brings me joy. It's like so much more complicated than that. But I think that that's something important to mention about this song because like when people listen to it, um, listening to that version on that album is key. And like I love the other like it's cool to hear him doing acoustic because there's like a version I think that came out on a bootleg thing, which
mm.
is cool. But it's not that's not what I have the connection with. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah. And is the feeling that you get from that particular line, is that a similar feeling that you'd get like when you read the lyrics?
Um, it's not as powerful. Sorry, like the reading the lyrics is not as powerful.
Mm,
Like the music itself is more powerful to me than the lyrics in some ways. Not that, but just that particular bass line.
particular bass line.
Yeah, yeah. Like when I think of that song, that's what I think of. I'm not thinking about a particular lyric. Um, Although of course just the refrain of most of the time and the way he sets it up each time is like
Mm.
a perfect, you know, thing as well.
The way he sings it, I think it feels like he's not quite sure either. it's like it's like yeah, I think most of the time, all right, but there's a bit of doubt in there. Like maybe it's not most of the time, maybe it's only some of the time.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
exactly. Yeah, there's
mm,
more. Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at before. Is like he's talking more about what he's not talking about. Than it seems like, yeah.
yeah. I've heard people talk about Dylan stuff sometimes. It's like it feels like the narrator might not be reliable. Like you don't necessarily believe what the narrator's telling you, that there is more to the story than what's actually there.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, my question on the baseline was, I guess, less about the depth of the feeling that comes from that baseline compared to the depth of the lyrics, but whether it's the same, if the feeling is this in the same category. Like I guess if it's,
mm,
again, it might be quite a tricky question to put your finger on, but whether I'm always really interested in songs where the music, like where if you just listen to the music without the lyrics, you might almost guess what the song's about, or songs where there's a juxtaposition which kind of works in a different way sometimes, but whether the feeling you get from that bass line is the same category of feeling that you'd get from the lyrical content.
yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, think of it this way: like if you're listening to a tune written in a different language. Which I've had this experience before, where I'll hear something, and maybe it's in a soundtrack, and that's a good example. And the reason why it's a good example is because soundtracks are meant to create emotion. That's like their job. And so you listen to it and you feel something, but you don't know what they're talking about. You don't have any idea other than, or maybe you do actually because of the feeling, but you couldn't say like, these are the lyrics. I think that's kind of how I would answer that question, where like I'll use like the trope of like the whole music as a universal language thing. And I really do believe that that's true, because I've experienced it. And I feel like I could go to another country and play them most of the time, that version, and probably somebody would pick out the same bass line part as me. Like if we did like a scientific like study, people, told us about their experiences. And I don't know why that is exactly, but there's something there. And in terms of like, is it in the same category? I would say it's yes and no, because with lyrics, you can, of course, there's an intellectual element there. With this particular bass line, there's really not. You could create one, but then it would lose its meaning in the act of creating one. So that's the discernation, I think, between how the categories could differ. But I think it's a little bit of a Venn diagram, because it's not as simple as like yes or no.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Jonah. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise. For
anyone listening, Jonah's new album is out. It's called Dockside. I'll put all the links in the descriptions to your website and social media and everything like that. So who wants to get a copy of the album, you can do. And yeah, thanks again, Jonah, and thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll be back with another episode soon.